Giant hogweed management on the water of Leith. I'm sure many of you are aware that certainly during lockdown, it was one of the most jobs considered to be essential by the council to continue managing the giant hogweed on the river. And we did do that, and in fact the lockdown provided another opportunity for us to get a better idea of what was going on along the whole length of the river. This is a wee presentation about what we do about giant hogweed and have done about giant hogweed on the river for the last 20 years, and how really in the last 5 years that's taken another big turn, and we're not only controlling the plant, we're also doing research looking at alternatives from the use of herbicide in controlling the plant. How does giant hogweed cause skin burns? I know you all know that it's a dangerous plant, and I thought it was a good opportunity to tell you why. The sap in giant hogweed is phototoxic because it's made up of compounds called pheronomoumarins, and they're found all over the plant, but particularly at highest levels in the leaf. And if you get that on your skin, in combination with UV radiation from sunlight, it actually alters your DNA so that it brings you up in a red rash and blisters. It makes your skin photosensitive, basically. So giant hogweed isn't a native plant to Scotland. It's from Central Asia and the Caucasus Mountains, and it was introduced in the 19th century as an ornamental species. But it's become a big problem in all environments in the UK, but also particularly along rivers. So it's very important to keep on top of this plant. So I've already sort of mentioned that it's a public health risk because it makes your skin photosensitive. But also, if you get the hairs that have the sap in your eyes, it can lead to blindness, and it can also lead to people that have asthma to have difficulty breathing as well. So it is a massive public health risk, and especially during lockdown, it was very dangerous because there were, well, Helen said 35% more walkway users, and a lot of those walkway users were trying to get away from each other. So they were going on paths, informal paths along the river banks rather than sticking to the walkway. So they had the potential to come into contact with giant hogweed more. It's also a very invasive plant. When it seeds, it can take up to 2 to 4 years to get into seeding stage. But each plant can release up to 50,000 seeds, and they do that by air. Their seed dispersal mechanism is by air, but also by water. So on rivers, it has a double seed dispersal mechanism. So it makes it particularly invasive, and it'll grow at the expense of all the other plants. So you end up with a monoculture and less plant biodiversity. It's harmful to other wildlife as well. So the reason that it has this photosensitive sap is because it's evolved as a defense mechanism against predators. So it basically stops insects, mammals, or fungus from attacking it. So there's nothing that eats it, but also if they do eat it, they'll probably die. And so it massively reduces the food or the feed potential for pollinators, other insects, mammals, anything that might be foraging along the riverbank. It's harmful to dogs and anything that has sort of exposed pores. So you can get dogs, if they get the sap on their paws, can come out in blisters the same way as humans can. It's also a problem because there's a short time frame of control. It comes up at the end of April and it will set seed by the end of June. So you only have May and June, really, you only have 2 months, 3 months at an absolute push in which to control this plant. And it grows in really difficult and hard to reach places that it's got to because it's been spread by the river or by wind. So we've been managing with the City of Edinburgh Council giant hogweed on the river for the last 20 years. As part of the Millennium Project, the council committed to managing giant hogweed from Slateford to Leith. And they did that every year. And in the 2008 Forth Rivers Trust approached us and said, there's no point in the council managing from Slateford to Leith if nobody's managing the plants upstream, which we had sort of realised ourselves. And they funded us by training myself and 2 other volunteers at that time and providing all the equipment and the chemical to control the upstream plants. So we started doing that in 2008 from Curry to Slateford. In 2017, we started a research project with Napier University looking at alternatives to the use of herbicide, because increasingly I was becoming concerned about using herbicide in a freshwater environment and how that was impacting other plants. In 2020, as a favour to the council, we managed the whole river. So we went into lockdown and the council's employees were not able to go and manage their normal stretch of rivers between Slateford and Leith. So because we didn't have any other groups that we were normally working with, we continued to manage the plant downstream of Slateford. So we did an extra 7 miles of river that year. We mapped everything, and that has revealed quite a lot of information that I'll touch on in a minute. In 2021, we did that again, and we also took in the Murray Burn too, because we identified it as a seed source due to the mapping. And we also in 2021 trained a plant volunteer survey team to help with the ongoing research with Napier University now in year 4. So how do you manage giant hogweed? It's quite a tricky thing. Volunteers and staff have to be trained as a specific qualification that you have to use a herbicide in an aquatic environment, and that's the safe application of pesticides in land and water. The training itself takes 3 days, and it's really, really heavily all about health and safety, and also about the environmental impact of the misuse of a herbicide in an aquatic environment. There's an exam at the end of it, and there's also a practical assessment, and it's actually quite serious and a little bit stressful to do. So any volunteers or staff that have this qualification know what I'm talking about. It's not a walk in the park, and it costs quite a lot of money as well. So once you've got that qualification, the staff and the volunteers have to learn how to identify giant hogweed at its very, very early stages. So if you look at this picture on the right here, don't know, can you see my cursor? Hopefully. You can see there's a green glove, and next to it is a very tiny giant hogweed plant. So we have to identify giant hogweed when it is a tiny little seedling. And that's quite hard to do. The plant all around it is mostly garlic mustard, but that little tiny giant hogweed plant, it's really key to be able to identify it at that stage, because if you can get it at that stage, it will never turn to seed and it will never spread downstream. The PPE, the personal protective equipment that we have to wear, is really important too. So we have to wear a complete hazmat suit, goggles, face masks, rubber gloves, waders. It's really full on, no exposed skin. And that's to protect us from the herbicide and also from the photosensitive sap. There's the sap that can make our skin photosensitive in the plant itself. And of course, we need to think about our waders and having our waders poles. So effectively, the people that are doing the giant hogweed management are working with a dangerous chemical in a dangerous environment with a dangerous plant. And it's quite full on, really. We wade from the most upstream plant, which we identified at the beginning of starting to treat the giant hogweed in Curry. And we just get in the river and wade all the way down to Leith, effectively. So we wade at a rate of 1 mile a day. So we're not very fast. So you can imagine how long it takes, but we're very, very thorough doing it this way. And I think that's really helping with the management of the plant on the river. There's also issues with land management. The reason that the council couldn't do it all is because they don't own all the land. And it's not only is it, sometimes it's bigger landowners, farmers, or people that have fields for horses and things, but also it's just in people's gardens. And as you know, there's a lot of people that have gardens that back onto the river. So it can be quite complicated getting permission, getting into people's gardens, getting onto people's land to manage the plants. but we have to do it. We have to get them all, because otherwise they'll just seed and spread. So because we've been doing this for so many years, we're actually in quite a unique situation on the water of Leith, because the giant hogweed plant numbers are low enough now between Curry and Slateford to allow time for a pioneering and much needed research project looking at alternatives to the use of herbicide. So since 2017, we've been working with the plant biologists at Napier University and various postgrads and undergrads to develop this research project that we hope to publish our findings about. So we've been using 4 methods of control of giant hogweed. One of those is a normal concentration of herbicide recommended by the provider of the herbicide. We've been using burning. We've been doing root cutting, which is basically digging the plant up. And we've been using a reduced concentration of herbicide. We've been using a third, less higher herbicide. And we've been using these 4 treatments on 47 4x4 meter test plots in between Curry and Slateford. We've had to train a team of 15 volunteers about plant identification, because before we apply any of the treatments, we survey every 4x4 meter test plot for every higher plant and bryophyte species within that quadrat. And the quadrats are really big for a plant survey. They're 4x4 meters, when normally you'd have a quadrat which was 1x1 meter. And the reason that they're so big is because the quadrats were selected because there was a cluster site of 6 or more giant hogweed plants in that area. But if you've got 6 or more giant hogweed plants, that's quite a large amount of ground. So the quadrats had to be 4x4 meters to encompass all the plants. With the research project, we hope to determine the efficiency of each treatment and also the effects on all the higher plants, the mosses and the liverworts population within the quadrat. So after 3 weeks, we go back and we survey again that 4x4 meter quadrat, and we'll treat any plants that have come back or we've missed or that are lingering again in the same treatment. And now we're in year 4 of the survey. Most of the quadrats don't have any giant hogweed in. So what we're now recording with our survey work is the long-term impacts of all the different treatments on all the different plant species in these quadrats. Early results from the survey show, firstly, burning doesn't work, just doesn't work. In fact, we actually abandoned it as a treatment method because it took ages and the plants just grew back immediately. Burning doesn't affect the root system, so it's in no way can it control this plant. Digging takes 8 times longer than spraying, but it is as effective as using a herbicide. Our worldwide management guidance says that if you have 200 plants or less, 200 plants of giant hogweed, then digging is a viable option. But to dig giant hogweed, it's really labour intensive. It's potentially dangerous because you're exposing the sap to the volunteers and the staff that are digging the plant. So volunteers need to be specially trained. They have to be provided with full protective equipment, and the plants have to be removed from site. Can't just leave them along the river, because then you're just leaving the sap exposed to the public. So you have to remove them from the site and bring them somewhere where you can safely compost them. But I can tell you now that it is possible to effectively dig giant hogweed and control it. We're also recording a lot of improved plant biodiversity in the quadrats where there is no longer any giant hogweed. So in amazing quadrat number 47, we recorded 52 different plant species this year. In 2018, this field plot contained 9 giant hogweed plants and only 34 different species of plants. So just controlling the plant itself, giant hogweed, increases plant biodiversity. We are already proving that with our early results. During the research project, we've been mapping everything. All the giant hogweed plants, every single one, both in the quadrats and between the quadrats. We had to do that originally to find our cluster sites of 6 or more plants. So I can just tell you that in 2018, so because we abandoned burning, the official start of the project was 2018. We trialed burning in 2017, but in 2018, the total number of plants between Curry and Slateford was 1,205. 764 of those were in the 47 quadrats. And this year, 2021, there's just 202 plants between Curry and Slateford, of which only 68 are in the quadrats. That's a total, that's an 83% decrease in plants on that 3-mile stretch of river and a 91% decrease of plants within the quadrats. And remember, we're really controlling the quadrats with a lot less herbicide, but finding a lot of positive results in the control of the plant. I think because we're just incredibly thorough and we know that they're there and we're revisiting the plants. Every time we find a giant hogweed plant, I take a way marker on a GPS. And with that, we can put it into a GIS system and create heat maps. So a heat map just really shows you the distribution of the plants on the river. So this top map shows where it looks really, really hot. You've got the highest densities of plants on the river. So this is in the research area. So in 2018, actually, I think that, yeah, this is 2018. You can see you've got a hot spot in Juniper Green, a massive hot spot at the bypass, another wee one just behind, I think that's like Collington Manse, behind Collington Manse, and then a really big hot spot in Invasive Corner in Craiglockhart Dell. So these are areas where the majority of the plants are recorded, where you've got a high density of plants. And from that, I was able to say, well, what's causing the giant hogweed seeds to really take hold there? And you can see 3 different reasons. One was the old milling industry, so sort of just like invasive species coming in because industry and things were delivered and seeds escaped from those deliveries. I think the bypass is a wind tunnel and seeds along the bypass corridor get blown or come down the land drains into the river, which is another cause. And Invasive Corner is a really big floodplain and the river gets really wide when it's in spate and it floods over the whole of Invasive Corner in Craiglockhart Dell, and then it drops its load because it's so wide, and in that load are the seeds, and that's why they take hold there. So it's like a historical reason, an infrastructure reason, and a natural geomorphological reason for giant hogweed plants taking effect. Because we've got the map underneath is the mapping from the research project in 2021. We've now sort of got rid of a lot of the plants. So this is only reflecting 202 plants. And really you can see that the work that we've done, I always thought it was coming from the bypass, but I don't think it is coming from the bypass anymore. The plants are not coming from the bypass wind corridor, which was my original hypothesis. But we've still got a cluster site coming in Curry. So I think the plants are maybe coming in from people's gardens and we're not aware of it. So if you know anybody that lives in the Leith Curry area that might have a giant hogweed plant in their garden, let me know, because I need to get in there and control that plant. Now, I mentioned that we did a favour to the council in 2020, and we continued going downstream of Slateford, controlling the giant hogweed plants. Now, this was a massive task, and it took weeks. And because I was used to mapping on the research project, I just continued to mapping the plants as I went downstream, controlling it. It's revealed a massive development in our management of the plant on the river. So there was a significant increase in the plants. If you look at the heat map at the top here, the research project is from Curry here down to the visitor centre, basically. And that heat map is the coloration is almost imperceivable compared to the rest of the river that we haven't been managing in the research project. And then you can see this massive hotspot here, and that is where the Murray Burn enters the water of Leith. So a little bit of investigating, and volunteers and I and Scott from the Forth Rivers Trust looked at the Murray Burn a little bit closely, and we discovered a lot of giant hogweed. In fact, between Riccarton Mains Road, that's this bottom picture here, and the bypass, there was over 50,000 giant hogweed plants on less than a mile of river. And it was just a massive eye-opener, because it was like, well, you'll never get rid of the plants on the Water of Leith if you've got this seed source coming in from the Murray Burn. So this year we went to the Murray Burn and we communicated with the landowners up there. So it's farmers, it's Heriot Watt University, it's the council. It's not really people's gardens, but it's bigger landowners. So we communicated with them, and some of the landowners went out and started to control the plants on their land in the Murray Burn. And then, because the farmer's field was so densely seeded with plants, we helped the farmer, because they couldn't in this year get their license to control the pesticide near the water, but our volunteers and staff did have that license. So we went in and we spent 3 days controlling the plants along the Murray Burn between Riccarton Mains and the bypass. And we also got Forth Rivers Trust, Scott, he came in and helped us. We went back twice and went back and removed all the flowering seed heads, because there was just so much of it. It made me think, I thought the Water of Leith was bad downstream of Slateford, but it was nothing compared to the Murray Burn. There was nothing else growing there really, other than hogweed. So in 2021, I recorded 2,500 giant hogweed plants between Curry and Leith on the Water of Leith itself. Only 202 of those were in the research project area. We've probably got some source plants still at the top of the river in people's gardens in Curry. We've already seen the impact of the control on the Murray Burn. The hotspots now on the downstream stretch of the river are at Murrayfield and Warriston. And I think that's because the ground, because of the hard engineering due to the floodworks, was left quite exposed and bare. So any seeds could easily colonize in those areas. We're hoping that the research project and the plant data will help us make a plan for recolonizing areas that are a bit bare after mass removal of giant hogweed. We do now think that we just have 200 plants between Curry and Slateford in the research project area between the quadrats. So it's now feasible to stop using herbicide on those upstream 3 miles of river. We can dig those plants between, and it's obviously going to take longer because digging takes 8 times longer than spraying, but it is now possible on the river. All of this work is about transitioning away from using herbicide in the future on the Water of Leith, and that is our ultimate aim. The research project and the mapping has started to hint towards this as a very real possibility. And I'm hoping that in 2022, we'll start seeing a reduction in plants, not just upstream, but downstream and on the Murray Burn too. That's it. Any questions?